All right, great. Thanks, Ash. And hi, everybody. Welcome. We're really excited for all of these short talks that we have today. I think we have a really great lineup for you. And so we're going to kick it off with Natalie Westwood, who is coming here to talk a little bit about her talk on perspectives of grad student teaching assistants on value and meaning in their role. So I'll have Natalie pull up her screen whenever you're ready, and I will give you a little hand raise when you've got about a minute left, and we'll jump in from there. So with that, take it away, Natalie.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I almost said this morning because for me on the West Coast, it is still morning. So yeah, I'm excited to be sharing with you a project that comes from when I was in the biotech program several years ago. And so this is work I did with my PhD supervisor, Diane Srivastava at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, BC. So just to give a bit of background, this is probably not surprising for anybody here, but TAships are really vital opportunities in post-secondary education. They provide support for undergraduate learning and opportunities for more in-depth and challenging classroom activities that undergrads would not otherwise have. They support faculty and staff by reducing some of the burden on the that population in terms of their teaching load. And for graduate students themselves, it really presents an opportunity, not just financially, but also an opportunity to develop their skills, especially if they are considering a academic position in the future. But oftentimes, a lot of research on graduate TAs has really focused on how effective TAs are and how valuable they are for both the undergraduate and the faculty and staff. Um, and there's been less of a focus on really centering TAs on their own experiences and really understanding what they're getting out of it. And so that is really what drew me to be interested in doing this. I came up with this idea while I was a biology TA myself. And so I thought it would be a really interesting idea to understand TAs and how they are making sense of their experiences. So I come from an ecological background, which meant I had to really change my philosophical approach. And so in order to do this study, I had to learn about phenomenology, which is an approach that really allows you to explore the depth of an experience and understand an individual or a group's experience in the particular context you find them. So it's less about looking for generalizable principles, but more so really valuing the experiences and potentially finding commonalities, but also celebrating and centering differences in those experiences. And because it helps center the individuals, I thought this was a particularly useful approach for really trying to make space for TAs in this body of research, especially in terms of looking at how TAs are finding value in their role or how they are being made to feel more or less valued, and also how they construct meaning of their role in terms of their larger undergraduate education. And so again, this approach allows you to acknowledge that there's a lot of complexity. People are coming to their TA-ship positions from many different identities and past experiences, which are really going to shape how they're making sense of these experiences. And so this allows you to make space for that. Yeah. So my main overall questions were to try and understand what graduate TAs find valuable in their experiences as TAs, and if the types of tasks or jobs TAs have, because at my institution there's a lot of variation in what TAs are doing, if if that had any real influence on if TAs felt valued or if it increased the meaning in their experience. And also just, I really wanted to explore that idea of what do TA ships mean in the overall education of graduate students. So I know for myself what this means, but I'd be really curious to hear from all of you at your various institutions and your own experiences, to maybe share what you imagine the perspectives of your TAs at your institutions might be. So I just want to take a minute or two for people to either reflect on their own, maybe jot down, and if you feel comfortable, I'd really appreciate it if you might share in the chat. What kind of perspectives you imagine your TAs might say or share when they ask those questions. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of ideas that have kind of some commonalities about getting a sense of what the role as educator might be, if it's a good fit for them. Does that develop, a sense of responsibility and expertise? Or is it really just something that they're dealing with to, get paid and survive while they're doing their research? Um, yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And so those were some of the ideas that I also had going into this. Uh, And so to kind of situate their answers before I share those with you, I used a theoretical framework using self-determination theory to better place and try and understand what could be motivating their responses. And so SDT, for those who are not familiar, is a psychology theory on motivation and what can influence the types of motivation someone might feel. So typically, if we think about that intrinsic motivation on the right side, that's doing something for the joy of something or the enjoyment, pleasure of doing it. And so there's an internal sense of control. You know what you like or what makes you happy. And so you're doing that for that particular reason. Extrinsic has a much larger spectrum to things that you're doing because you could be punished or there might be a very specific reward, which is a more external sort of control, all the way to maybe you're not doing it just for the joy of it, but you know something, but you're choosing to do it anyways, which is a more internal sense of control on that extrinsic spectrum. So that could be a sense of, maybe taking classes that make you do a bunch of presentations, not because you like presentations, but because you know that you want to go into a career path that has a lot of emphasis on presenting and those skills. And so this is a way for you to gain those skills. That's still a more internalized choice, as opposed to an external version, external control for that. Same sort of example might be the university telling you you need to complete X number of courses that have a presentation component in order to get your degree. And if maybe the university policy disappeared, then you would probably not take those classes. Whereas with or without the policy, you would still um, want to take those classes for your own individual reasons, even if you're not doing it because you enjoy talking. So there are some things that can shift where somebody falls on this spectrum. And so if we imagine this blue dot is a person, there's kind of three broad categories of human needs that increasing these can move someone to from a feeling of external control where something is being forced upon them to do to internal control where they're making a choice. And so those three things are autonomy, sense of being able to choose, relatedness, sense of belonging, and competence, a sense that they can actually complete something. And so typically, if you increase somebody's perception of their autonomy, relatedness, or competence, they're more likely to either become more intrinsically motivated or have a more internalized sense of control for an extrinsic motivation. And so this can allow people to have consistent behavior even without external pressure to keep doing something, which can be really helpful with TAs, right? You want them to care about teaching, even if there's not someone watching over their shoulder to make sure they're doing the right thing. So, with all of this in mind, what we did is we were able to find five TAs who were available to be interviewed in the summer of 2021 about their previous teaching that past term. Our interviews were semi-structured, and we sometimes added questions or skipped questions depending on how the interview was going. And so our TAs were all recruited from three different courses that are first and second year courses that represented a range of tasks. So there was one that was mostly marking and observing the Zoom chat, so a lot less typical student interaction. There was one where the TAs did take over some class management. There was some group projects, and so they had some responsibility for checking in on those, but there was still an instructor who did most of the teaching. And then there was a third one where, although there was an instructor who did all of the teaching in the lecture part of the course, they had pre-designed tutorials where the TA was given a lot of freedom and was the sole instructor for those tutorials. And so they could make some adaptations, but also there was a problem set for each of those tutorials, and the TAs were responsible for helping students through that process. Our TAs also, despite there only being five, came from a range of backgrounds. Some were required to TA, some were not. There were master students, PhD students, some international and some local students, just a whole range of identities, despite only having five people. So there were kind of three themes we were looking at, benefits, challenges, and then overall meaning and value in their role. And so when we looked to see what sort of themes emerged when talking about benefits of being a TA, there were kind of two main categories. One, which has been talked a lot about in the literature, is concrete skill development. And then the other one, which is sometimes talked less about, is what we called an affective benefit. So there was a sense of feeling mentored from instructors, sense of enjoyment of just getting to show up, and also creating relationships and mentorship relationships with students. And so those were talked about, I would say, by all of our TAs. Every single one of them talked about all of these benefits. But there was a certain kind of joy that came up when talking about these effective benefits more so than the skill development. So for example, one TA shared that by getting to be a TA, even though they're not given the responsibility of being an instructor completely, they don't have to do all that prep work. As some of you did mention in the chat, it does give you a taste of what it's going to be like. And they mentioned that it kind of sets the stage of what being a post-secondary educator is. And so when thinking about their career, they already know what the expectation is. And so that was really useful for them in making decisions at different stages of their graduate education about what sort of relationships or connections they might want to focus on and where they might want to put their energy when going on the job search. When thinking more about those affective skills, although several TAs mentioned this, I think this TA really put it lovely, which is juxtaposing their research where they had really long hours at the lab, but then when they would get to teach, it was something that was fun and exciting for them. So just a break in what they were doing day in and day out. And even if some of the TAs didn't express as great enjoyment of teaching as this particular one, it was really helpful for them to have, yeah, that kind of experience. So for costs and challenges, this was more temporal based. So there was a sense of at the beginning of the TA-ship being unsure about things, whereas during the TA-ship, just the reality, especially when it came to going over hours. So this was especially raised by one TA in particular, where she went over her hours quite frequently. And so she viewed it as her own personal challenge around time management. But what happened was she was putting in a lot of effort, really valuing the student's experience. And that meant that she was trading off how much working for free, basically, so students would have a better education. And I think this is a really helpful thing to keep in mind that TAs, when they're going over hours, it's not necessarily because they don't know they are. They're making a choice because it feels more ethical to them to do that. And so that might change how we want to reframe this with them. And so I'm going to just quickly go through one example of value and meaning. And so it was really came down to interaction, both with students and with faculty. And so because most people here are faculty, I'll focus on the faculty example, which is being seen as a collaborator, albeit a junior collaborator, was really what they felt was most essential. And that was demonstrated when they would talk with faculty during prep sessions, and things that they suggested could be different or change were very much taken into consideration. And it showed value for their experience and what they could give away. So despite thinking that there could be this whole range of different experiences, overall, we saw a lot of agreement in how TAs saw their experiences, despite their difference of backgrounds and what roles they played. But yeah, overall, TAs saw it as positive, but there are some complexities around those costs. And so there's not a simple fix. And so I think this requires some more creative thinking. So with that, I know I'm over time, but I'll wrap it there. And yeah, we can discuss anything else. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was really great. And it sounded like you have some really rich data there. I want to open it up for questions. If anyone has any that you'd like to pop in the chat or raise your hand and unmute, which is also great, feel free to do so. Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. While we're waiting to see if some questions come in, I have a little question for you about, was there anything that maybe you were surprised by in the data that you saw that you didn't really expect?
Yeah. I really did think I was going to see a huge variation in how TAs saw their experience based off of what sort of role they were, which is why I was really interested in looking at those different courses. And that did not come through at all. They all found ways to feel autonomous or like they were connected to their students. So it's just really interesting to see that they all managed to find a way to get those similar experiences and needs met.
Okay, I'm seeing a couple in the chat coming through. So Grant was asking, do you think these different roles provided those CAR components in different ways? And I think you kind of just answered the question, but was there anything else to add?
Yeah, I think it also came down to a lot of these instructors are teaching faculty here. And so I think because they care about their courses and have a little bit more time to spend on that, that probably helped a lot in making sure that students, no matter what, or TAs, no matter what the course was, were able to get those roles met. And there was also creative thinking on the faculty part to give TAs a chance to, for example, guest lecture even in those classes that had much less student contact.
Cool. And so another comment that came through was um, the dilemma of how much effort to put into improving the student experience for free. And I see there's some agreement in seeing that. Were there any comments maybe or any thoughts on those particular ideas there that came through for you?
Yeah, I think this was something that when I've shared this with others, especially people who have recently finished grad school, everyone feels very strongly that this is quite, yeah, it can connect quite strongly with this experience. And I think it comes down to either having to find a way to counterbalance with an ethical reason why not to go over your hours. A TA, now a faculty member, but someone who was a TA at one point said that she, even though she was the head of our union, would also go over hours. And the way she stopped herself eventually was that she realized she was setting up the next TA for failure because the professor would think that this was a reasonable expectation and they could do it, so why can't you? And so for her, she found an ethical reason to not do it because that would harm a future TA. Um, yes, by
Yeah,
law, they're not supposed to, but
yeah. I think that's a really great point, and maybe helping TAs see that could be beneficial
Mhm.
too. I think we have maybe time for one last question real quick. Can you talk more about the interviews, like who was asking the questions from control?
I was so at the time I wasn't TAing, but I had in the past year been a biology TA. I was still a graduate student, although I only knew one of our interviewees. But she knew beforehand that I would be the interviewer and still was okay with that. So it was a peer-to-peer sort of interview process.
Got it. Thank you. Well, great. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was fantastic. And thank you for sharing all of your data with us. Thanks for all the great questions as well.